Roostertail Talk, a podcast dedicated to everything related to the sport we all love, hydroplane racing. I'm your host, David Newton, and it's time once again, so sit back, relax, and welcome to Roostertail Talk. It is March 2nd, 2020, and welcome to episode 24 of Roostertail Talk. I've been looking forward to this episode for some time, but last week I sat down and had a fireside chat with Chip Hanauer in the waterfront in Bellevue. We talked for almost 2 hours about his career, hydroplane racing legends, the state of the sport, radio-controlled hydroplanes, and even teaching of all things. Since we talked for so long, I decided that I'm going to break this episode into 3 or 4 different pieces for you to enjoy. And even if you're just a casual fan of the sport, you'll know this man needs no introduction. Well, I'm sitting down here in Bellevue, Washington. I'm sitting here with Chip Hanauer. Chip, how are you today?
Good. How about you?
Good. I'm doing great.
You're the one that worked all day, not me. And being a teacher, having been a teacher,
yeah.
I know how much work that is.
Oh, yeah.
And at the end of the day, I was done.
Oh, yeah.
It's like racing. There's no letting up. You have to be on the whole time.
Yeah.
So.
Well, I've said to people it's kind of like acting, right? So you're as a teacher, you're on for 6 or 7 hours, and then you're spent.
And you go home and beat everybody up.
I only got a couple people at home to beat up, so it's all right. Well, it's 2020, and it's been 20 years since you've raced an H1 or URC. What was it back then? Hydroprop?
I think it was still like H1.
UHRA?
No, it wasn't H1.
UHRA?
I think it was UHRA.
Yeah,
So.
it's been 20 years.
It was hydroprop, and then it went back to being...
There was Abra in there sometime. I don't know. There's been 20 names since URC.
None of them worked anyway, no matter what they named it.
So it's been 20 years. How's retirement been?
Retirement's been wonderful.
Yeah.
I highly recommend it to everybody. You know, when I hear people say they don't know what they would do if they retired, I just shake my head because there's just so much to do. Yeah. And I don't know. When I think back to racing and working, I don't know how I got everything done, but I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, well, good. I know you picked up some hobbies. I think you're playing guitar with Don Locke now.
I had actually started music before I retired.
Oh, okay.
And I had so many other interests, even while I was racing.
Yeah.
So now there's never a shortage of things to do.
All right. We talked about working while you raced, and I remember because I did a report when I was in grade school about you that you graduated from WSU with a degree in special education, correct? Yeah. So were you able to use your degree in that field at all, or did you work in a different profession as you raced?
No, I worked right in the sweet spot of what I wanted to work at, which was working with, at the time, I don't know how they label those kids now, but they were labeled behavior disorder kids. Mm-hmm. So my academic background was really strong in psychology and education. So I went to work in Port Townsend in a self-contained class for behavior disorder kids. Mm-hmm. And it was the hardest job I've ever done, no question. Yeah. And I did that for 2 years and had no intention of really racing again. That was going to be my path. Mm-hmm. And I was excited about it. I don't know if I could have continued to work with the intensity of those kids for the length of my career. I loved those kids. I loved being around them. But as you know, it was who's driving the bus, me or them. Right. And I had some pretty tough kids. A lot of my kids were convicted felons who were being cared for in Port Townsend. So it was tough sledding. Yeah. Well, it's a very commendable job, right? It's very tough. I loved it. I got exposed to it in high school. There were one of my favorite teachers who became a friend in high school said, "Hey, there's this program where you leave campus for an hour a day." And the minute I heard leave campus for an hour a day, I was like, yeah, that sounds good. I'll do it. Yeah. And I said, yeah, it's good enough and working. in the elementary school. And I was given to this teacher, I'll never forget her. Her name was Mrs. Belzvic. And she had a young boy, I think probably 4th grade. His name was Kinnan. And she really wanted to keep him in the regular classroom, but he was borderline whether he could stay in. So I went and worked with him for an hour a day and thoroughly loved it. And I thought, oh, I would love doing this for a living.
Yeah, it's definitely a profession that people are passionate about. I'm passionate about it as well, and teaching. It's really sad that they say now that the career expectancy of a special ed teacher is about a year. So after about a year, they last, and then they get burned out and they quit.
Yeah, I don't think people have any idea of the intensity of being a teacher.
Yeah.
And, and the work you bring home, the amount of your own money you have to put into it, and anything that I think is of great passion, whether it's music or racing or teaching, if you're passionate about it, it's going to extract a lot from you. And it's teachers are not prioritized in this culture. And I think looking ahead, my nephew, I'm very close to, lives in Hong Kong.
Oh.
And he said, it's game over. And he's worked in all over Asia, in Vietnam, China, Singapore.
Wow.
And he said the game's, what did he say? The outcome is set, but the game's not over. He said, Asia, highest priority is education, education, education. And it's not here. And we're going to pay a huge price, probably not in my lifetime, but certainly in your lifetime, in your children's lifetime.
Yeah, it's definitely not reflected in our society.
No, if you want to make the analogy to racing, because I guess that's why we're here.
Oh yeah, we're talking about racing. We're supposed to talk about racing, right?
The racing, the summer, was only a reflection of the winter.
Yeah.
Once the season started, if you had a good boat and good prop program, a good engine program, and you'd work together as a team, it worked. But there's nothing you can do once the season starts to really change much. And I think that's true in our culture. Unless we decide that education is number one, we're doomed to be a follower, not a leader.
Yeah, that's very true words. And you spoke of something there that I think the average fan doesn't understand, how many months of preparation it takes to get these boats out on the water and really prepared for the season. That they can't.
It's true.
It's not just magic. It happens at the lake.
And it's different than it is now, because I think we had some seasons we had 12, 13 races in a 3-month period. And I always got a kick out of friends or associates would say, well, what does the team do when the season's over? Do they go home? Or like, no, that's when, as we just spoke, that's when the magic happens. And I've even believed that you got to get on the right cycle. And what I mean by that, if I would rather everybody gets their new boat finished just in time for the season. So then you're working all season trying to develop the boat. I always would rather have a boat come good at the end of the season and spend a winter testing it. Yeah. So that when you got, in our case it was always Miami was the first race. So when you got to Miami, you knew what you had. Of course, it never worked out that way.
No, it never did.
But that's the way it should work out.
Yeah, I remember my dad saying like a slogan that his shop, because he worked for Ken Muscatel in his team, and his slogan was, if it wasn't for the last minute, we wouldn't get anything done. Because it was all thrashing. Right?
Yeah.
So it was just,
and that's not the best way to do anything.
No.
But Ron Brown, for example, he was one crew chief that understood that. He was the most well prepared and forward thinking he was a great manager, Ron. Where other crew chiefs, there's one crew chief out. Let him remain nameless, but he always.
You're trying to name my dad again, right?
I'm not. He just prided himself on. We just got it done the night before, and I'm like, that's really nothing to be proud of. It's should be. But to Ron's credit, when I was with Ron, literally the trucks were packed, and the doors shut, and everybody went home for a week before the first race. He was that well prepared.
That says a lot for the sport of hydroplane racing.
He was a great manager. Yeah. And you see that in car racing. Growing up as a student of car racing as a little kid, I was always comparing, and the bow racers never quite got it about what it means to be prepared and the professionalism, unfortunately. Yeah. Some did. Ron did.
Speaking back to your retirements, I believe you retired a couple times.
I never retired.
You never retired?
Never retired.
Never officially? Okay, well, I got that wrong.
Well, no. I never used the word retirement until I retired from Pico.
So you retired once then?
I retired once. I stopped.
Yeah.
Two other times.
Yeah. So once you stopped, what brought you back? Because there was a year gap, I believe, after Circus.
Yeah.
And then after Budweiser, you had a couple years off.
I'm probably not proud to say, money was a big part of it. And I have to go back to 82 and how I looked at the sport and myself in the sport is at the end of 82 with Alice, I had realized all my childhood dreams. I won a Gold Cup, won my national championship.
World championships as well.
Yeah, world championship. But I never look at my racing career as just unlimited. I go back and look at, and I was done. I had done everything I wanted to do. And everybody was dying. You see, that's what people in the sport now have no appreciation of, is the amount of death that was going on. It was just an accepted part of the sport. I replaced dead guys. I replaced Jerry Banks after he was killed. I replaced Bill Munsey after he was killed. In limited boats, I replaced guys, Wayne Thompson in California, who was paralyzed. So the sport was a completely different thing. So at the end of 82, with Dean had died that year, Bill had died the year before, I was replacing him. I'm out. There's no reason to stay in. I've got everything I wanted to do. And the other thing that entered my mind is, I was in my early 20s. And I thought at the time that if I'm going to put time, like I did put time into racing, if I continue to do that, it means I'm not building my career somewhere else. So right then and there, I said, I quit after 82. Most people don't know that. And I told Fran and Jim Lucero, I'm out. And a big part of it was the amount of death. I didn't want to die. So Jim Lucero and I sat and talked, and he said, let's go at this from a different angle. Let's build a monocoque cockpit. Let's strap you in, and let's work towards an enclosed capsule. And we did that. And I'm hugely proud of that. Yeah. Today it's taken for granted, But
it totally is. It totally is.
Totally taken for granted. But at the time, what people don't know is the amount of opposition to it.
Really?
Huge opposition.
And why is that?
Well, people, the idea, so when we told H1 or whatever it was, we're going to do it, and APBA, they wouldn't let us do it. Really? They said, well, you could drown. And my response to that was, yeah, and if I do, we move the peg up one notch. Because if I die in a boat and you do an autopsy and my lungs are full of water, it means I survived the accident. Mm-hmm. There was something to save. had you got to me, your philosophy of, which they always kept saying, you need to be thrown clear. Yeah. And I kept saying, that's not working. So, and drivers, there were a lot of drivers publicly in the papers said, never catch me being strapped into a boat. So I'm really proud of that Jim, and I and that crew fought that battle and made it work.
Yeah.
And then Bud then put up the first canopy. It wasn't very good, but it was a start.
Yeah,
it was a start. So, I think the legacy people have about me in the sport is wins and championships. But the proudest thing I am is of the safety. Nobody had been belted into a boat. Nobody in any class, and now it's just taken for granted. So I'm really proud of Jim and the crew and my own participation, because it was unnerving, the idea of being in an open boat, upside down, drowning, wasn't appealing, but, too many people were dying, so I'm very proud of that.
Well, it's people like you and Lucero that make those steps to make it safer. It's probably why the sport's still around today, right? Because I think if people kept continuing to die in that manner and nothing was changed, there wouldn't be a sport around it.
The people that are around the sport, I had no idea what it was like. The media was demanding that the sport be stopped. There was editorial after editorial that this is ridiculous.
Yeah.
And why are you doing this? And cities were considering not having. And if you look at the sport prior to then, that was the legacy of the sport. It was this hugely lethal thing to be doing, and I believe we turned the corner that first race when we strapped me in.
Think how that happened, right?
Yeah, Jim Lucero should be given a great deal of credit.
Okay. Well, you talk about something interesting there, that the boats are so different now. The enclosed canopies, the harnesses, the Hans device. And you drove in a very interesting time period where you started out behind the engine, conventional boat, and you saw the evolution of the sport. It's probably, in the decades there, that was the most it had leaps and bounds, right? So it went to pickle fork, open vents, strapping down in the cockpit, enclosed canopy, switching from piston power to turbines and different power plants. How was that as a driver as the boats evolved? What was the challenges for you? Did your driving have to evolve with it?
That's a good question. I can't really tell you what they were. Each challenge was... I've never been asked that question. It was just accepted. It was, okay, now we got this problem. Now we have this. Now we have this. Now we have this new engine. Then once we had some experience with stuff, then I started having some opinions. And I always felt that when I got to Unlimiteds, they were behind Limiteds.
Really?
I thought limited technology was, and I think that's what Bill Muncie, Jim Lucero, and the Blue Blaster was. What that was a limited boat. And everybody else was running these little narrow transom, narrow boats. And I think, it was revolutionary, but it was just a big limited boat. So when I got to Unlimiteds, I looked, other than Bill's Atlas van lines, they looked antiquated because I had seen limited boats. But, as the sport and the boats got better and better, a couple of things stood out to me. The engines had to change. We're just running out of them,
Yeah.
And when we went to the turbines, the first time the Pan Pack left the pits, the first turbine boat, when it left the pits in Tri-Cities on the warm-up lap, I went, that's it. There was no question. No question.
Yeah.
It was just, you could see how effortless that thing was. Of course, that particular race didn't work out so well,
No.
but the writing was on the wall. So we knew we had to go that way. Unfortunately, I always thought it was going to be a stopgap, a bridge to get to a better louder, more interesting, crowd appealing power plant. But unlimiteds have a problem, and once they do something, they get locked in. They won't change. So I was a opponent, if you go back in the archives, and like I can think of for circus for sure, because I was getting in a lot of trouble because I was winning with circus and with Atlas and Miller, but the whole time I was going, these things are terrible.
Yeah.
Got to get rid of these turbine engines. And I remember in Seattle, I did an interview and said, this is horrible for the sport.
Really?
And the sport hated me. The powers that be hated me because I was getting a great deal of attention because I was winning. But here I am, in their mind, bad-mouthing the sport. And I wasn't bad-mouthing the sport, I was bad-mouthing the power plant. That we're going to pay a price for this. If we don't get back to an engine that has crowd appeal, we're going to be in big trouble. So in Seattle with circus, I remember somebody called Mr. Bennett from circus. He didn't come to the races very often at all, hardly. And I got a call from him on Saturday morning, and he said, I'm getting a phone call that you're bad-mouthing the turbines. I said, yep. I said, you're paying me. Do you want me to stop? And he said, are those your true feelings? I said, those are my true feelings. He goes, no, say whatever you want. Oh, wow. He goes, I'm paying you to drive the boat. If that's your feeling, you go ahead. So Django unchained after that. And I think I've never really been, by the powers that be in the sport, they never wanted me around because they looked at it as being negative. I never looked at it as being negative. I looked at it as being progressive and trying to do what I thought was best for the sport.
Well, that progressive mind, that's what keeps businesses going and flourishing. Right. Or not, right?
I'm sure there was people at the Singer typewriter company that were saying, oh, this word processing thing is ridiculous, and no, you've got to, and therein I think lies where we are with the sport. They have not been at all progressive. And the people that bear the most responsibility for that are the owners, because the owners are the ones that have the power in the sport. There's been commissioners and whatever they have, but the owners have had the power. So if the sport was on top of the world right now and just the greatest thing going, you would have to give the credit to the owners.
Yeah.
But that's not where the sport is.
No.
So that responsibility lies with the owners from way back to today.
Yeah.
Because there's nothing new on the horizon.
Right. Yeah, it's been kind of the same game for quite a few years.
Same game, and I don't know how many more indicators. If I was in any other business and I stood up in front of the people in that business with a whiteboard and showed every indication, sponsorship down, television gone, the number of races down, prize money down, payroll for the people who were down. I mean, there's no indicator that's up, but yet no change.
Yeah.
So can you imagine if you were at Amazon or Microsoft and you were showing nothing but negative, do you think they would just go, well, let's just keep going? No, it doesn't work that way.
No, there'd be some change involved, right?
There'd be change involved. I know it happened fast.
Yeah.
I think there's a BMW commercial, car commercial, and they're talking about they're already thinking of the car 20 years from now. Hydroplane racing has not had that kind of thinking.
Well, talking about the future of the sport, in your mind, what do you see happening here?
I see it going away.
Sad.
I think there's two scenarios we're at this point. Either there's a new vision and they immediately start working at a new vision with a clean sheet of paper. That what we have then will go away and be replaced by something more progressive, that meets the market needs that exist today, or this goes away, and it just goes away. There's no big time powerboat racing.
Yeah.
And I think that's we're right there, and we're past. Frankly, I'm surprised. It's hanging on.
To me, that's really sad to think about because
It's really sad.
it is. And my father, he shared so much of the sport with me, and I've got a 4-year-old now he likes going to races. He has fun going to races, and I want to share that with him. And it's a great summer.
And the thing that's sad to me is it's all fixable. Two things I think have to happen. One is boat racers have to quit thinking that they're boat racers and that they're in the boat racing business. You're in the entertainment business, like it or not. If you want to be a professional racer, then you are in the entertainment business, not in the racing business. NASCAR isn't a racing business, it's an entertainment business.
Completely.
Is that pure racing like when I grew up? No. But they're here and they're still racing. So that shift of mentality has to take place. Then once that shift in mentality takes place, that we're going to be in the entertainment business, then you need leadership, talent, and capital. Because you can't get a business to market without leadership, talent, and capital. Unfortunately, I don't see any leadership right now. I don't see any capital coming right now. And I see no vision. And I put out a vision to people I've had discussions with that kind of were, interested in what would it take to get racing? And I don't think it's complicated at all. And there's a lot of, but there's been no action, no capital spent.
Yeah.
And you can't start a business without capital.
We can hope, right? But I'm
not much of a believer in hope. Hope has to be something that initiates action. And all of us who love the sport have been hoping for years about some action. But if action doesn't come, I remember the book Alive. Did you ever read a book Alive? It's a.
I remember the plane crash.
It's a rugby team that crashed in the Andes, and there was some cannibalism. They were, but two guys. Everybody was just sitting there waiting for help, and two guys struck out, and it's an amazing story. But they took action, and their action saved themselves. It was a long shot, but it saved themselves, and it saved a lot of people on that. I don't see that in racing. Unfortunately, in our form of racing.
Unfortunately. Well, I want to shift gears here.
Good.
I don't really have a name for this, but I came up with a list of names. So I want you to think about what your immediate reaction is to these names. And it can be one word, it could be, you can go off into a story if you want. So I just want to hear your immediate reaction.
Okay.
So Dean Chenoweth.
Tragic, in a word. I just told Dean's story the other day. Dean came to me, when Dean was driving the Griffin, he came to me in Syracuse, New York, and we became pretty good friends. And he said, Chip, for the first time in my life, I'm so happy. We'd been remarried, and he was running marathons, and he goes, for the first time in my life, I don't need racing.
Wow.
And I said, then get out now. Because again, let's go back to what we talked about earlier. The sport was lethal.
Yeah.
And I said, Dean, get out. He goes, I'm just going to finish the year. And he was a wonderful guy, a great businessman, a great athlete. He was a great runner. And it was tragic.
Yeah.
And he was a good friend.
Bill Muncie.
Bill was progressive. He was also a great driver. I think he was a rare combination of showman And there's been a lot of showmen in the sport, but they couldn't drive necessarily. Bill had both. And Bill was quite the showman, but that son of a bitch could drive.
Bernie Little.
Bernie was very good to me. I really liked Bernie, always liked him, even when we raced against each other. I think people always were shocked when I say, I really like Bernie, but we had a good personal relationship. And he would always go out of his way to maintain our personal relationship above and beyond what may be going on in the sport, like the turban thing, for example, or other instances. He would always seek me out and say, hey, this is not personal, you get that, right? And I said, absolutely get that. So he was a good friend, and I was really grateful that I got to drive for him, although those were tough years at Budweiser.
Yeah.
It was great to get to know him and stay at his house. And he was a character. He was just fun. Yeah, it was a lot of fun.
Steve Reynolds.
Steve was a great showman and a tragic story. You know, he paid the price in the learning curve of canopies. We didn't know what we didn't know. And what we didn't know is we had to get enough room for your head and neck to flail around in there without making contact. You mentioned Steve Reynolds. I give a lot of credit to Linda Reynolds. From my understanding, you know, Steve struggles. He's got some real life struggles due to his injuries. And I think Linda, they're not married, but Linda has remained a very good friend to him and really done well for Steve. And he's just a very charming, likable guy.
Jim Croftsville.
Best driver I ever drove against. Absolutely brilliant. Tough. Fair. Just barely. And I was aware of Jim before I drove against him in Unlimiteds. I had watched him the first time I saw him, and I was considerably younger. He came to Green Lake for the Nationals. I can't remember what year that was. And he had the absolute wrong boat for Green Lake, which is this big, wide open, big corner course. He had a Lauterbach 2 1/4. And Steve Reynolds had the White Lightning, which is probably one of the most magical boats ever. And it was perfect suited. And I watched Jim Cropfield get Steve so backwards and turned around, and he ended up winning the Nationals with a boat that had no business doing that. And I learned a lot from that race and applied it down the road many years later. But Jim was, to beat Jim Cropfield was one of the highest achievements I felt. Every time I did beat him, I was like, I beat the best guy there is out there. And when I got beat by Jim, I was okay with that because I got beat by the best guy there was out there. And I remember when he came to Budweiser, I sat down with the crew because I so admired Jim and watched him. And I said, I might not be able to handle this guy. And they're like, what? And I said, this guy's amazing. And I said, I'll give it my best, but I don't know. So, yeah, a lot of respect for Jim.
Dave Ilwalk.
Dave probably is the most universal boat racer ever. If the rule book said you had to design the boat yourself, build the boat yourself, build a propeller, build a gearbox, and drive it, he would win every race. I mean, I don't think Dave was necessarily a great driver per se, but he brought so much more to a team. I didn't bring anything. I could drive, that's it. Dave could do so much for a team.
Bob Stiles.
Oh, I owe so much to Bob. He was such an advocate for me. It was a wonderful time in my life, and the Squire Shop. If you grew up in Seattle, Squire Shop was part of a young man's life, and just had a lot of fun. When my first couple unlimited races with Bob have remained friends all these years, and just someone that I'll never forget and always be grateful for too.
Fran Muncie.
Same thing. Fran and I one time became, the 82 was a magical year for me. Crazy magical. I remember, I've told the story a number of times, but I went down one evening when they were just getting the boat done, and the sign painter was there, Gary Ebert, I think, and he was painting my name on the side of the Atlas van lines where Bill Muncie's name always was. And I got out of my car, and I'm just like, that's unbelievable, for a kid that grew up in Seattle and wanted to race.
Yeah.
So that Fran gave me that opportunity, and then what we all did cooperatively with that opportunity, it was just magic. And Fran and I and that group, we had so much fun. And she's just a lovely person. We laughed hard together. We cried together. I owe her so much, and I'm so grateful that, she was in my life.
Yeah. Jim Lucero?
Jim, he was the first maestro, I think in Unlimited. So when I came into the sport, he was like a god. He had the magic touch. And I think what he had was he was progressive. Jim always looked at, like the belts, like boat design, like the turbine. He wasn't trapped in, well, that's what everybody else is doing.
Yeah.
So, and that's its own form of brilliance, I think.
Yeah. David Newton.
David Newton. He owes me a lot of money, but I can't find him. I will like, Roger, your dad, and you as a kid. Everybody in the sport knew your dad and loved your dad, and you're always tagging along as mini-me, and and I think you and your dad were the single biggest, if not the only, conduit between unlimited racing and RC racing, and brought them together, and I think also gave everybody the respect for RC racing. I tell someone, if you have a ton of money and you wanted to get into unlimited racing, you could probably do pretty good pretty quick. Good luck in RC racing. RC racing, to win a race in RC racing, takes nothing but years and years of hard work, dedication, getting your nose away. It's really, really competitive. Making a final heat in RC racing is, a huge feat. Yeah. That's not so in unlimited racing, So it is the most competitive form of powerboat racing out there, in my opinion.
Wow. Well, thank you. We worked a lot of years to make it that way.
And that was the other thing is, you and your dad have worked, hard at not just participating, but building it. Oh, yeah. And everybody owes you gratitude for that.
Yeah, I know my dad was very proud of what he was able to accomplish with that, and the club's growth.
Yeah. And everybody liked him.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad to hear you liked him.
Yeah. It was funny, Bill Siebold, I don't know who Bill Siebold is, but he's one of the greatest boat racers ever, in my opinion. He was a Formula One racer, and he always said this, he goes, I'm the only guy in Formula One that you're going to get beat by, but then you're still going to want to buy him a beer at the end of the day. And that's great if you can be successful, if you can build something like your father did and still be liked by everybody. And he accomplished that.
It was so nice to hear Chip say those nice words about my father at the end. That is one thing that blows me away, that after 12 years of him being gone, how many stories come out about my father, Roger Newton, and how well he was liked. It says a lot about the people who were involved in the sport, but also makes me feel like a piece of my dad is still alive. Chip had some amazing things to say and share with us. There are a few things that surprised me, like him talking about wanting to quit after his Cinderella season in '82. Thankfully for the fans, he did not, and he went on to an amazing career. Well, I hope you've enjoyed our episode. Make sure you come back next week to listen to our next episode. We release new episodes every Tuesday at 5 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. Also, don't forget to hit that subscribe button on your podcast player, as well as rate and review your experience. For more updates on Hydro News, check us out on social media. We're on the major players, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Roostertail Talk is also online with our website, www.roostertailtalk.com. On the website, you can sign up for an email subscription list to get notifications on upcoming episodes, Hydro News, podcast updates, and much, much more. Finally, this is a free podcast to all of our listeners. And if you're really enjoying your experience and want to help us to continue to grow and expand, please donate. You can find a link to donate through PayPal on our website through the support tab. So until next time, I hope to see you at the races.